Well, joining us now from Sydney is Antony Loewenstein. He's a Middle East affairs analyst and the author of the books The Palestine Laboratory and My Israel Question. Great to have you back with us, Antony. JD Vance and Donald Trump, they're making it crystal clear that nothing would happen to the occupied West Bank. Now that we have these moves being proposed by Israel, what response do you anticipate from the United States now? Do you think they will intervene to prevent this plan from becoming a reality?
No, is the short answer, or very unlikely. I mean, this is about as likely as Donald Trump keeping on saying to anyone who'll listen that he stopped 8 or 9 wars since he came to office a year ago. Listen, annexation of the West Bank has happened. The idea that it's now being more formally discussed and proposed in the Knesset is not insignificant, but the reality is for years, speak to anyone who spends any time in the West Bank. I have spent lots of time in the West Bank as a journalist. A lot of people will see the reality of what is going on. Massive pogroms by Israeli settlers on Palestinian villages being ethnically cleansed. I mean, annexation has already happened, really, in practice. And the result on the ground is, I think, a policy which is really begun or accelerated after October 7, 2023, where Israel obviously went into Gaza in a campaign of mass destruction and mass extermination. There are certain parts of the West Bank, especially in the last 6 to 12 months, that look remarkably similar to Gaza, not least in Jenin. So the policy, the rhetoric and the reality is often doesn't match. And let's just finally not ignore the fact that the US recently has sent more weapons to Israel, more munitions, more defense equipment. This is the reality on the ground, not whatever JD Vance or Donald Trump might say when he wakes up tomorrow morning.
This is the first time that land registration has resumed since 1967. Tell us more about how this fits into the longer history of the illegal settlement of the occupied Palestinian territory and state control in the occupied West Bank.
Very soon after the Six-Day War in 1967, there were a handful of what were then seen as fanatical Jewish settlers who believed that God gave them the land and they had the right to settle and build settlements, essentially colonies, and a handful did. And over the years, of course, they expanded to where we are now, which is roughly 750, 800,000 Jewish settlers, all illegal across the West Bank, which includes, of course, East Jerusalem. And over the years, what really happened was there was often this push and pull in the Israeli courts, the High Court there, which in general has been a rubber stamp for the occupation, but at least there was an illusion that a lot of it was Palestinian land. And sometimes the state found that, or the High Court found that the land should go back to a Palestinian that might have been stolen by an Israeli settler, and occasionally it did. But the bottom line is, in many cases, the courts are ignored. They're literally ignored by the state, and they're ignored by the IDF, and they're ignored by the settlers. And even if on the occasional case, as I said, the High Court makes a decision which says that the land is owned by Palestinians, and there are documents, by the way, that go back, in some cases, generations, if not more. I've seen these myself, owned by Palestinians saying that this land belongs to them. It does not belong to Israeli illegal settlers, many of whom in the last decades have arrived, in fact, from other countries, the US, Australia, and elsewhere. So historically, there's often been this sort of illusion put forward by the Israeli state and the Israeli courts that this land essentially is Palestinian and the settlements really are only going to be in certain areas. That illusion is gone now, that there are settlements expanding, outposts expanding, huge amounts of settler violence expanding. None of this on one land is new. It's been going on for a long time, but it's massively accelerated where you have case after case after case, often not given enough attention in the Western press, but in some parts of the Palestinian media, Arab media, and obviously some parts of the Haaretz, the Israeli press, which says that there is a deliberate plan of coordination between the IDF and settlers to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the West Bank. It's not hidden. So whatever legality was used as a cover for decades of settlement expansion, that is now gone. And I think people need to remember around the world that years ago, before October 7, there was this big fight, if people will remember, around the Israeli High Court, that somehow its independence might be neutered or challenged. The Israeli High Court has provided a rubber stamp for this occupation for decades, with the occasional decision that says that Palestinians actually have the right to their own land. So this is where we're at. And without international pressure, massive pressure, which will not come from the US, we are in big, big trouble.
As we've been reporting, this plan would apply to Palestinians living in the so-called Area C of the occupied West Bank. If this process does go ahead, what would be the real-world outcomes for Palestinians living in that area, some of whom have been living there for generations? And how quickly will those effects be felt, do you think?
Since October 7, we have seen in vast parts of the West Bank tens of thousands of Palestinians and Bedouins who have been ethnically cleansed, kicked out, removed, pushed from their lands by settlers or Israeli soldiers, and they have nowhere to go. So they're essentially nomadic within their own territory. They're not allowed to go back to their own land, or their life has become so intolerable that they simply have to leave. You can't live 24/7 with settlers and soldiers attacking you, setting your homes on fire and potentially killing you. It's a no-brainer. You're going to leave. And that's what I fear is going to accelerate here, which again goes to the ultimate plan, which in some ways has been the plan of Israel and Zionism from the beginning. As few Arabs and Palestinians as possible on this land. You can't maybe remove all of them, you can't necessarily kill them all, but the idea of making their life so intolerable that they'll be kicked out or removed or ethnically cleansed. And the vision remains, frankly, amongst many in the Israeli mainstream and political elites, that those Palestinians will end up in another country, Jordan or elsewhere. That is the ultimate goal here. As few Arabs as possible. And you can imagine if that was done in reverse. There'd be a global outcry. How are you going to ethnically cleanse Jews? But somehow when it's Arabs, it's seen as acceptable, if not supported by much of the world. Often, frankly, much of the European Union, many in the Arab world, and of course the US.
Okay, Antony Loewenstein, we'll have to leave it there. Great to get your thoughts as always. Thank you.